Throughout all of My Hero Academia, very few quirks have proven to be as powerful as the half and half quirk. So, giving Izuku a half light, half dark quirk makes for an incredibly interesting story. I thank you all for watching, and enjoy. We start the story off with Izuku being born in a cold hospital room. As he is born, however, all of a sudden, half the hospital is erupted under a very, very intense, shining, bright light, while the other half is cast into shadows. However, as he is born, this flare-up of his quirk slowly dies down, leaving a young baby Izuku Midoriya. Half of his hair is a dark, deep, mystical purple, while the other side is a light yellow. Izuku, crying as a baby, causes shadows to appear with each burst of his cry. However, it slowly begins to fade as he is placed in his mother Inko's arms. She soothes the young baby Izuku, calming him down as he rests on her shoulder. All of a sudden, however, a doctor appears in the room. However, hearing about Izuku's sort of outburst being born with this intensely powerful quirk, he goes up to Inko and asks her, "Izuku, your child, what exactly happened upon his birth?" He has a clipboard and pen in his hand to seem at least a little bit more professional, as Inko looks towards him, trying to make sure he isn't so loud as to wake Izuku up and cause another outburst. She looks towards him and begins saying how he was born with sort of split hair and how he shined half of the light in the room was blinding, and while the other half was almost a pitch black darkness. It was so weird how the light and the darkness could coexist so well together in one space. The doctor takes notes, his goggles staring down, reflecting his paper. As Inko tries to read it, it seemed almost gibberish. As the doctor walks out of the room, he types in a number into his phone. It begins ringing as a caller picks up the phone. "Hello? Yes, all for one. There's a quirk you may be quite interested in. It appears this very young child, his parents weak, extremely weak, unordinary for him to be born with such a powerful quirk. It's a light and dark quirk, one that might give you an upper hand against All Might." "Good," All for One laughs to himself, telling the doctor he did well, before telling him to keep an eye on Izuku's power. He wants to make sure that it's worth stealing and not just holding up some of his memory or storage for all the quirks that he has. The doctor listens, saying right before hanging up the phone. We go back to Inko in the hospital bed as the quirk doctor walks in. He hands Inko a card before telling her that if her son ever has any more trouble with his quirk, that all she has to do is call him and they can do some tests and see if there's anything they can do. She thanks him before being discharged from the hospital after a couple more days of rest. From there, a couple of years end up passing. Izuku is 4 years old, and he still has no control over his quirk. Whenever he sneezes, light pierces the room, basically ejecting off of him, blinding anyone so unfortunate to be staring at him, causing many to basically distance themselves from Izuku. They didn't want to be blinded or cast into shadows anytime Izuku either sneezed or coughed, all because he couldn't control his quirk. And this led that very powerful young Izuku to pretty much grow up a loner. He didn't have very many friends, and he kind of preferred it that way. Izuku knew he was powerful from a very young age, he just knew he was too young to not be able to control it. And growing up, still wanting to be All Might, wanting to be the number one hero, he continues this passion, this love for heroism. However, this also has a reverse effect. Seeing Bakugo, someone that shares his love for heroism and his passion for it, bully and sort of twist the words of others and the abilities of others around him to bully him, to put Bakugo himself up on a pedestal. It disgusts Izuku. He hates it. How can someone who is so prepared to be a hero basically bully people, especially at such a young age? Teachers see it, and so do parents, but they don't say anything. Yet another travesty of the quirk-filled world. If you are born powerful, you are born privileged. However, Izuku seems to almost be an extraordinary case of this. Still yet privileged, but he decides to stay away, doesn't want to bully people. He wants to be nice. He has an innate kindness. However, Izuku would end up finally snapping. Remember, he is only 4 years old. A early spring morning, the flare-ups continue. All of the pollen on the ground as the seasons begin to change. The wind blowing, picking it up, blowing the dust right into Izuku's face. He sneezes over and over again, continuing, and this would continue as he walks into school. As he sits down at his desk, he would begin sneezing uncontrollably, having a sneezing fit, as light would continue interrupting the class. The teacher would finally have enough, slamming his fist on the table. "Izuku Midoriya, that is enough. Either control your quirk or go to the principal's office now," he says, erupting through the class. His booming voice sends echoes throughout the hallway. Izuku, this small child, only in kindergarten, being yelled at by a teacher. He understandably doesn't know what to feel except sorrow and sadness. He bursts into tears and waterworks streaming down his young face. This, of course, causes another flare-up, this time with both of them similar to his birth. The room cast into an endless light and an endless shadow. The light so bright no one can see, while the shadow so dark no one can see as well. Izuku looks around, finally finding the door before walking out, opting to not go to the principal's office. He races out the hallway, his light expanding everywhere. He still continues to cry as his sniffles echo throughout it. Finally, he pushes open the large, heavy front door of this elementary school before finding a small koi pond and sitting down at the bench next to it. Izuku sobs as he rubs his eyes red, his hands shaky. He can't believe he was just treated like that. He's only 4. He doesn't really know what else to think. All he knows is he wants to play with toys and be a hero. As Izuku's sitting there, a mysterious figure that has almost seemed to be watching Izuku for his entire short life appears. He sees Izuku as he's wearing a top hat, his gray hair hanging over his eyes. He looks down towards the young boy before sitting down, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "It's okay, kid. It's okay," he says in a soft, warm voice. However, something seems off. Even to the young 4-year-old Izuku, he knows something isn't right. The man looks down towards Izuku, smiling, before telling him, "I can make all your pain and your worry go away, kid. Do you ever feel like you don't want anything anymore? You don't want your quirk anymore? I can help you. I can help you be better. I can fix you." Izuku stares on, asking, breaking his words up through the sniffles. What do you mean?" he says, his tears still flowing down. This sudden forceful of words, forcing them out, causes Izuku to erupt back into cries. He can't control himself. However, the person stands up, placing now both his hands on Izuku's shoulders. "I can free you from this darkness, from this mess, kid. All you gotta do is say the word." However, Izuku, all of a sudden, his heart drops. His parents always told him don't talk to strangers, and now in his sudden burst of sorrow, he had done just that. Instantly, he stands up, wiping away his tears as fast as he can. "I'm sorry, mister," he says, his voice choked up, stuttering. But my parents told me not to talk to strangers. I have to go, he says. However, the person places a hand hard on the back of his head, gripping down, ruffling Izuku's hair, causing Izuku to flinch. His heart continues to drop, beating faster and faster. It felt like it was beating out of his chest. The man laughs. I don't think you can get away that easy. All of a sudden, however, Izuku, now completely scared for his life, fearing that he was about to get kidnapped, causes shadows to control and erupt out of his body, giving Izuku enough time, disorienting the man. He releases his grip from Izuku's head as he runs away, shadows continuing to follow behind him. Izuku bangs through the door, his front door, as Inko, sitting at her desk, still eating breakfast and drinking her morning coffee, jumps up in shock. Why was Izuku home? She wasn't expecting him. He should still be at school, and he never walks home. He is only a kindergartner, after all. She jumps up, looking towards Izuku, completely confused. Izuku, why are you home? What's going on? She says, instantly in a panicked and worried mother mode. Izuku begins crying again, explaining to her what had happened, as she instantly hugs Izuku, wishing him the best and saying that it's all gonna be okay. She rubs his hair, telling him it's fine. Inko instantly, after hugging Izuku, begins dialing the police, giving them a description of what Izuku had said. Meanwhile, we cut back to right after Izuku had run away from the man. All Might, standing atop a building, looks around, looking for his target. He knows that All For One is around. And finally, he spots a mysterious man in a top hat, still completely disoriented and confused after the smoke had welled up in his face from Izuku. All Might jumps down, slamming his fists into the ground, staring towards All For One, smiling. We meet again, All For One, he says, looking towards him as All For One laughs. Nice of you to join me, All Might. I was just this close from stealing another kid's cork. You really gotta get a lot quicker. All Might shakes his head, flailing his arm to the side. That is enough, All For One. Your time of terror ends now. He points to the ground as All For One begins to laugh. If that is what you think is going to happen, then be my guest. All For One instantly goes in for a Missouri smash right towards All For One's head. However, he dodges. The two go into a very rapid hand-to-hand combat as All For One eventually gets the upper hand on All Might, sending him flying back into a building before creating a goopy-like teleportation portal, allowing him to disappear. All Might slams his fist into the ground, destroying parts of the sidewalk, yelling out, "Damn it! I can't keep letting him get away. I can't!" Nanashimura lands right next to him after using her float cork, finding him after a battle, a quick one at that, with him. It's okay. We'll get him. I know it. Her, after seeing her young student so close to fighting All For One, was a bit worried after all. He was still in UA, and the fact that he was hunting All For One showed a level of arrogance and impatience. However, it also showed an ability that he knew he needed. He needed to stop All For One once and for all. So we go back to the very young Izuku. The years slowly begin going by, and with those years, Izuku eventually learns how to use his quirk. His light matter and his ability to manipulate it eventually gets better and better until he can create small orbs of light, and the same can be said for the dark path as well. He can create these almost pitch black balls of darkness that can be used for a multitude of different things. He can use them as almost a smoke screen and to disappear, which the light could, as well as a light flash. And Izuku loves practicing these abilities. Every single day, he rushes home after school to go into his room and to practice. However, eventually, Izuku's mom has enough. Izuku has sent out blinding light across the entire house, filling it up, or sending a wave of darkness across the house, sometimes even while Inko is cooking, causing her to spill entire amounts of salt into her food, leaving dinner completely ruined. This, of course, would eventually cause Inko to kick Izuku out when he is training. If you're going to train to be a hero, you need to do it somewhere else, Izuku. I've had enough of you tampering and toying with all of my dinners with your little dark and lightness. Izuku would nod his head. Okay, Mom. Okay, I'm sorry, he says with a slight smile. And with Izuku not being able to practice in his own home, the only other place he could go was the woods, as he can't just practice his quirk in the city, as he's barely even in elementary school. Some pro hero is going to see Izuku practicing his quirk and is going to yell at him, and he's going to be forced to go home. So, with Izuku rushing off to the woods after his elementary school classes, and he ends up continuing to train here. It is quiet, it's peaceful, and he can even train on trees, allowing Izuku to send light flash after light flash and light orb after light orb, barreling towards trees. And this is where we would see Izuku go from 7 to 10 years old, and through that time, his abilities would grow as well. The light and darkness would go from barely being able to scratch the tree bark to being able to take out entire chunks of the trees. And with Izuku beginning his ability continuing to go stronger, eventually he would need to find more trees. Every single tree in the first part of the forest by his house had been experimented on by Izuku. He had sent out light orb after light orb, even creating small light daggers or dark daggers to practice on the trees. And this would cause all of the trees to pretty much die, having constantly been under so much stress of the young Midoriya's powers. So with Izuku forced deeper and deeper into the woods, eventually he would end up finding himself at the forest training camp that the first years had used in the original My Hero Academia storyline. As we hear Izuku sending out light orb after light orb, causing a tree to fall down, smashing against the ground, sending small particles of dirt flying into the air, we see one of the wild kitty cats walking out, investigating the noise. They walk out to end up finding the young Izuku standing there breathing heavy. His breaths very, very hard and heavy as they sneak up on him, deciding to play a little prank. They go up, sneaking up behind Izuku's back before yelling, "What are you doing?" in a harsh, heroic voice. As Izuku jumps up, hairs on the back of his neck standing up as he jumps back, his hands out in front of him. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do anything, I'm sorry. I won't do it again, I swear, he says as they begin laughing. Mandalay laughs as she puts a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, kid. Now, you barely look 10 years old. Why are you out here training your quirk? Shouldn't you be playing with, like, action figures or video games or something? Izuku shakes his head with a strong smile. He says, I am going to be a number one hero. The number one hero, and I am going to take All Might's spot. The woman smiles at Izuku, shaking her head. That's quite lofty dreams you got there, kid. Are you sure you can live up to them? He pounces his fist up into the air, pumping it up with a strong smile, flexing his tiny little 10-year-old bicep, saying, Yup, I know it. I know I'm gonna be the number one hero, he says with a smile. The woman smiles as well before bringing Izuku back towards her base. The only reason Izuku even bothers to trust her is because she is in a hero outfit and he recognizes her from the Wild Kitty Cats group. As she brings Izuku back, she introduces him into the other members of the group before they begin training him. They decided to take him in, bring him under their wing. Never before have they seen such a young kid be so insistent on training and training as strong as he was. He was soaked in sweat and breathing heavy, pushing his quirk to the very limit. And every single day after school, after Izuku finishes his homework, he would rush to go practice with them. Of course, his mother would end up getting a little worried and would eventually end up asking Izuku where he runs off to all this time, leading to Izuku to break the news to her. He's been training with pro heroes, he says very, very excitedly as she just smiles and shakes her head. She sighs. I can't really believe this. Well, yes, I can. I'm proud of you, Izuku. Of course, leave it to you to find pro heroes that would train you. I know you're going to be one of the best heroes someday, Izuku. I know you will. Her smile lighting up the entire room as Izuku brings her in for a hug, holding her tightly. 5 years would end up passing as Izuku would continually train with all of them. Together, they would all grow stronger and stronger. And this is where we see the Wild Wild Kitty Cats group basically become top 20 heroes. With the powerful Izuku quirk, even if he was only a teenager, they had been able to work and practice themselves. Not only was Izuku getting stronger and a better person as well as a more potential better hero, they were also as well. As Izuku sits in his middle school seat, flipping his pencil back and forth, fluttering it in between his fingers, he smiles, looking up from his desk. His middle school teacher had walked in, putting chalk up on the chalkboard. Thereon it said, "Where do you want to go for high school?" Izuku would raise his hand as his teacher would call on him. He would smirk. "I'm gonna go to UA," he says all confidently as the class begins laughing. Izuku hadn't used his quirk in front of many of his classmates, these people being the ones that he had been around since he was 4 years old. So, of course, they knew it. Poor little Izuku can't control his quirk. All of these things that they had grown up with, they would blurt out, laughing at him, sneering, snarling at him. "Oh, please," some of them would say. "You can't even control your quirk, can you? And you want to be a pro hero. Please, just save yourself the time and waste. You're just gonna go out there and make a fool of yourself." Izuku would shake his head, confident. He knows what he can do, and he is confident in his ability. He doesn't need to have all these people validate his opinion of himself. Bakugo stands there, tisking to himself, thinking that Izuku, while probably getting stronger and probably can control his quirk, has no way of being stronger than him. He is the strongest person from their middle school, and he is going to be the #1 hero. This, of course, after all the snarling, the teacher would calm the class down before looking around. "Calm down, class, calm down. Anybody else want to say where they're going?" he says, as Bakugo would raise his hand as well. "You already know where I'm going. I'm gonna go to UA and become the #1 hero," he says, his voice filled with malice, as if sort of bullying Izuku, taunting him that he is going to be the one to go to UA, not him. Izuku smirks towards Bakugo as the class cheers. "See, Izuku?" they say, pointing towards Bakugo. "That is what a real hero looks like. Bakugo. Bakugo's gonna be a real hero, not you. Not someone that can't control their quirk," they say as Izuku shakes his head. The bell rings with Izuku standing up, gathering his things, walking out without a hitch. No problem from any of his other classmates. They knew his quirk was powerful, and they didn't want to mess with him, so the most they would ever do is just call him names in front of a teacher so that he couldn't do anything about it. As Izuku would walk into his home, he would place his stuff down before rushing off, just like so many times before, to the training camp base building. As he would arrive, the kitty cats would welcome him before they would end up handing him a letter. Addressed to it was himself with a UA branded seal. He would look up confused, wondering, What is this? Why are you giving this to me? As they would smile, placing hands on him before all bringing him into a hug. We're so proud of you, Izuku. So proud. And because of that, we're honored to say that we're going to be recommending you to UA. Izuku's face would drop. He's shocked. Wait, what? You're recommending me to UA? He says, his face instantly lifting, smile broadening over his face. He begins glowing out as they tell him to calm down. Izuku, you're glowing. Oh, sorry, he says, as he rips open the letter. Dear Izuku Midoriya, we are proud to announce that you have been selected as a top recommendation for this year's applicant cycle. Please show up at such and such time for the recommended exam. Izuku smiles once again, bringing them all in for a hug, thanking them all as they nod their heads, knowing you're the only one we'd ever do this for, Izuku. Go get him. We know you've got this, they say to him, as Izuku nods his head. Because of it being the recommendation exam, it was happening way earlier than the normal, admissions exam. And because of that, Izuku would walk in nearly 8 months before the actual UA entrance exam. As he walks in, Izuku would sit down at one of the many auditorium seats. Present Mike would walk in, seeing the scattered array of students, smiling, using his microphone quirk and ability to use and echo his voice across the hall, as he would announce just all the instructions for the written portion of the test. Izuku would struggle mightily with this. Most of the recommendations were hero sons and hero daughters, or even daughters and sons of the rich, so they had money for tutors. Izuku, on the other hand, while yes, smart in a public school sense, didn't have any tutors to train him and basically help him study for this test, leaving Izuku to struggle mightily. However, eventually he would end up finishing it, passing it up to the front, turning it in as the last person to turn it in. However, this wouldn't stop Izuku. His confidence would still be at an all-time high as they then bring all of the recommendations towards the obstacle course. This was going to be their entrance exam. The hero teachers all stood up at an observation booth, staring down towards all of them. So we have the famous Shoto Todoroki, son of Endeavor, Momo Yaoyorozu, daughter of the Yaoyorozu family. They would begin listing off a bunch of other recommendations before finally reaching Izuku. And then we have this kid, Izuku Midoriya, they would say, pointing towards his name on a piece of paper. He's not from any sort of famous family or rich family. Even his parents aren't even heroes. And yet somehow he managed to get a recommendation from the Wild Wild Kitty Cats. Interesting. We should make sure to watch him very carefully. I have a feeling he might prove to go beyond our expectations. The teachers would nod at Nezu's words before the horn would sound. The obstacle race begins. Todoroki would use his ice to glide through many of the obstacles very, very easily until he made it towards the minefield. Every little bit of ice he would send would erupt, causing the landmines to go off. Yaoyorozu would use some sort of device she would make, allowing her to get across the giant gorge or ravine that they had placed there. Izuku, on the other hand, would have to think outside the box. He didn't have all of these sort of things that could allow him. However, he decides to do something new. He's going to use a very, very big blast of energy, of light energy behind him to sort of act as some sort of turbo booster to get him across. He does so very effectively. Remember, he has been training his quirk for over 8 years. That amount of training would lead anyone to be a very, very near master in their ability. And since Izuku was doing it at such a young age, he was natural. He was skilled at it, and it was second nature. So with Izuku trying this, he was able to do it first try, jumping over the ravine with ease. However, upon reaching the minefield with a lot of the other students, he would look around sort of confused and in shock. He wasn't sure before he would send tons of light and dark orbs scattered across the landmine field as they would all ignite, blowing up a large majority of this field, leaving it mineless. The minefield was now empty, allowing Izuku to rush off towards the last part of the obstacle course. And this, of course, would be a giant 0-point robot. It would stare down towards Izuku, looking towards him, reaching its hands down towards him. He would recoil back in shock as it would continue moving closer and closer towards him. However, he would reach back his arm, creating a giant ball of darkness within it before he would whirl it up, sending it flying towards the robot. The robot would jump back, trying to dodge, but it was far too big and far too clunky, causing it to have a direct hit of this ball of darkness on it. The darkness would rip apart the robot's insides, causing it to malfunction. It would start glitching and twitching its head back and forth until it would fall, falling down to the ground. With the robot now down on the ground, Izuku is easily able to go and cross the finish line in first place. This gives him, of course, very favorable odds with the UA teachers. They saw him go and place himself out in front to do the things that no one else was doing, as they were still kind of holding themselves back, unsure of their own abilities. Izuku was comfortable. He went in and did it, and that confidence was very appealing to the UA staff. So as Izuku and the rest of the students would finish up the race, they would all be funneled into a very small classroom. There, the teachers would begin announcing the list of cuts and those who made classes 1A and 1B. And of course, Izuku Midoriya, Shoto Todoroki, and Momo Yaoyorozu would be among the top 3, making class 1A. Izuku would smile before going up and shaking Nezu's hand, thanking him, as he would then leave. He had his UA uniform in a box, and he held it under his right arm. He was walking back to his house before getting sort of an eerie feeling. Something didn't feel right. He would open the door, twisting his key, shaking the knob as he would push the door open. It would creak before hitting the wall stopper. He would walk into the dark room, flipping on the light, as there before him something horrifying lay. Blood. Blood was scattered everywhere across the room. He'd look down in shock, yelling out his mom's name. "Mom? Mom, where are you? Are you okay? Are you hurt?" he would say, looking around. The blood would be pooling on the ground. However, all of a sudden, the door would start rattling again, the doorknob. Izuku would turn his shoulder, looking over, peering over, almost in a scared and confused way. Looking over, however, he would see his mother walk in with a bag of groceries. Izuku would rush towards her, opening his arms for a hug, but he would phase right through her. She was an illusion. "Foolish boy." A familiar voice would ring out as Izuku's hairs would stick up on the back of his neck. "No, it can't be. Izuku would say, muttering under his breath. It was the same person that had tried to talk to him when he was 4 years old. That same voice. He would recognize it from anywhere. Izuku, having the hairs on the back of his head stand up, he would look back as the fake Inko, the illusion of Inko, would look towards him before speaking with malice in All for One's voice. Your quirk will be mine, kid. It will be. I'd watch your back from now on. Don't let it be so easy. What? Where's my mother? Izuku would say. His sort of entire tone and demeanor would shift, snarling towards All for One. However, he would just laugh. You don't have to worry about that now. She's in good hands. Izuku would shake his head, going towards her, going to punch his mother's body. However, his hand would phase right through her. Remember, this is but an illusion. Izuku would fall to the floor, clenching his fists, slamming it right into the wooden floor. How could I let this happen? He says as All for One laughs before the illusion of Inko would slowly fade away. Izuku, shocked, would race off towards UA. He had to let them know what he had seen, what had happened. Meanwhile, in a very dark, mysterious warehouse, we see the familiar green-haired mother tied up to a small wooden chair. She thrashes against it, thrashing against her ropes, her chains, holding her down, wanting to get back to her son. However, she can't. And that is when the all-too-familiar Quirk Doctor would walk in, looking towards Inko, flipping through multiple papers on his clipboard before smiling. Good. It seems we finally have you. One step closer to getting that kid's quirk. I'm gonna have a lot of fun with you, sweetie. The Quirk Doctor says, grabbing Inko's cheek, shaking it back and forth as Inko tries to bite his finger. We cut back to Izuku racing into UA, slamming open Nezu's door to his office. What is the meaning of this, young Midoriya? He would say, as Izuku, out of breath, would be breathing heavily. My mother, she's taken. I think she might be dead. What? What do you mean? I got home and there's just blood everywhere, and she was gone. And then she appeared. She was an illusion, and she said she was going to steal my quirk, but it was someone that tried to when I was super young. I just don't know anymore. Izuku's words would begin flowing out of his mouth uncontrollably. He was like fumbling over himself. He couldn't control himself because his mother was just kidnapped and could possibly be dead. Nezu would slow Izuku down, telling him, It's okay, Izuku, just calm down. We'll get to the bottom of this. Meanwhile, you can move your stuff into the dorm buildings here. We just built them for this upcoming class. So just move your stuff in, you can stay there. I'll have Todoroki and Momo move in as well, so you're not alone. Izuku would nod his head, thanking him, before going off. As he would arrive at his house, he would see a couple of police cars there, waiting for him. Izuku Midoriya, they would say, as Izuku would nod his head. Nezu gave us a call. He said that your mother was kidnapped. Izuku would nod his head, leading them inside, where they would see the gruesome scene. Many of them shaking their heads and some even throwing up. The sheer amount of blood looked uncanny, unhuman-like. It was strange. Look, kid, we're about to turn this into a crime scene. I suggest you take all of your belongings and move them into UA like Nezu suggested. Izuku would slowly nod his head yes before moving on. Okay. This is then where 8 months would pass. The UA entrance exam would come and go, with Izuku, Todoroki, and Momo all living together alone at the UA dorms. This is where they would begin forming their friendship. These were some of Izuku's closest friends now, and some of his only friends similar in age to him. So when it became time for Class 1A's first class, they would all sit together. talking about wondering who their teacher, their homeroom teacher, is going to be, and all of the usual class-filled banter that one might expect on the first day of high school. However, all of a sudden, we would see the sliding wooden door open. Aizawa would walk in, shuffling his papers in his hands before sitting at his desk. "Quiet down, class," he would say, his voice booming over the rest of everyone's voices. "Today, we're going to be doing a short quirk apprehension test. I need all of you to go and put your PE uniforms on and head down towards Lot E. It's a dirt lot. Don't be late." All of the students would nod their heads, racing off towards the locker rooms to put their PE uniforms on. As they would arrive, however, Izuku and everyone else would see that it was right. It was just a dirt-filled lot, and Aizawa would arrive shortly after, tossing Izuku a baseball, and would then point off in a direction. Aizawa would get out some sort of mystical camera-like device and said it was going to track the distance, telling Izuku to throw the ball as far as he can. Izuku would reach back his arm, powering up a giant sphere of light within it, pushing that sphere right into the ball before expelling it forward, sending the ball flying into the air. It would go flying thousands of meters, finally landing at a calm 4,000. Aizawa would clock it before smiling. "Maybe this year isn't going to be so disappointing after all," he would say, as the rest of the students would wonder what he means by this. He would then toss a ball to Bakugo, telling him to throw it as well. He would launch it into the air, but would only get 700. The rest of the students would come and go, all doing their best, as we would then see them do the race test as well. Izuku would get a modest 5th place, with Bakugo and Todoroki holding up the 1 and 2 spots. And with the quirk apprehension tests now over, Izuku and all of his classmates would be told that they now have to move in to the UA dorms. Of course, Izuku, Momo, and Todoroki would already be there, so they got to leave early, while the rest of the class would be told that they have until midnight tonight to move the rest of their stuff in. They would all agree before rushing off to continue packing and moving their boxes into the building, while Izuku, Momo, and Todoroki would sit in the lounge area just watching TV. A couple of weeks would go by of normal classes and normal sessions, passing just like anything else, going on without a hitch and no problems. So then that leaves it time for their first ever hero class, and lo and behold, who better of a teacher to teach this hero class than All Might himself. He walks into the room, yelling out, "I am here," slamming the door open, as all of the students look on in excitement. All Might would then pass out their hero costumes that they had been designing for the past couple of weeks, and would then tell them to go put them on and go off towards the city. This is then where we see All Might tell each of the students which group they're going to be in. Izuku and Momo are going to be the heroes, and they will be facing off against Bakugo and Todoroki. Many of the students would look on. These are the pinnacle of 1A. These are the top students, and this is going to be one of the best battles they have seen. They're basically witnessing firsthand some of the top quirk users and some of the most potential for the top hero spots in the future. All Might would then tell our heroes, Izuku and Momo, that they can now enter the building. Of course, them being heroes would walk in slowly. Bakugo and Todoroki, being the villains, would look around, looking hallway to hallway for them. And Bakugo, his personality befitting of a villain, would end up splitting apart from Todoroki. He would jump away from him as Todoroki would reach out, yelling for Bakugo to come back, that they need to stick together. He knows just how powerful Momo and Izuku are. However, Bakugo wouldn't listen, still believing that Izuku cannot use his quirk very powerfully. Izuku would place a ball of light in his hand before floating it out in front of him. This light would illuminate the hallways, acting sort of as a flashlight as him and Momo would walk the hallways, looking around, until all of a sudden Izuku's light would go out. He turned it down so he could listen more intently, starting to hear this sort of sparks flying, like something was happening behind him. He would yell for Momo to get down, jumping over, grabbing her, wrapping his hands around her, pulling her down to the ground as an explosion would send flying right over them. Momo would look on in shock, asking Izuku how he had heard that. However, he would shake his head, yelling that now's not the time. Bakugo, standing at the end of the hallway, seething, would look towards Izuku. "So, Izuku, you finally ready to see why I've always been better than you?" Izuku laughs it off as his shoulders go up and down with his laugh. "Oh please, Bakugo, don't kid yourself." A sphere slowly begins forming in Izuku's hand. This was one of Izuku's favorite techniques that he had learned with the Wild Kitty Cats. They had taught him to form his energy into weapons and into different things, and the light spear was always one of his favorites. Bakugo would jump at him as Izuku would block it, his spear being held in both hands. As Bakugo would go in trying to overpower him, but it wouldn't work. Izuku would flip his hands up right into the forehead of Bakugo before sending the bottom part of the sphere, that blunt bottom, right into the temple of Bakugo, sending him stumbling back. He would shake his head dazed as his vision would be blurry, spinning around as Izuku would then be there, his spear up in one hand like he was throwing a javelin, as he would throw it right towards Bakugo. He would go to block with one of his gauntlets as the sphere would go right into it, cracking it, making all of these fragments of the gauntlet shatter, being sent flying everywhere. With Izuku having bought enough time, Momo would then yell for Izuku that it was time. Their plan was working. She had just created a giant cannon right in the middle of the hallway, and with nowhere to go, Bakugo had a cannonball going right towards his face. He would try to dodge, but as the cannonball echoed throughout the hallway, sent flying towards him, it would land a direct hit right into his chest. He would cough out blood before being sent flying through a window, the pane shattering, sending glass everywhere. Bakugo would land on the city streets, knocked unconscious. Izuku and Momo, smiling towards each other, would then high-five, yelling that they knew that would happen. They knew their plan would work. Before shifting their focus, they still had another villain to capture, and they only had a couple of minutes left to do it. As the timer would slowly begin counting down, Izuku and Momo would look towards each other, trying to find Todoroki. And eventually, they would. Todoroki standing next to the device, looking towards them as he would see them begin walking through the doorway. He would send a giant iceberg right towards the doorway, blocking it off. However, Izuku would wrap this dark energy around his hand, punching it right into the ice. Before long, Izuku and Momo would then be inside the room with Todoroki as he would send countless flurries of ice and fire barreling their way, until Izuku would finally have an idea. The two, Izuku and Momo, would be hiding behind a shield that Momo had made. The fire being sent flying at it would go straight upwards and around them as the heat was beginning to make the two of them sweat. "I have an idea. I've never tried something like this before, but I hope it works," Izuku says, diving towards one of the pillars supporting the roof of the building. He looks towards Todoroki before uprooting his hand up into a fist, his hand slowly beginning to clench as these hands of darkness would spew out of the ground, beginning to wrap their dark fingers around Todoroki's legs and hands. They would jump towards him, pulling him down to the ground, reaching back, sending his arms back, basically subduing him like he was in handcuffs. Izuku would walk over towards him, walking past him and placing his hand on the device, securing the win for both Izuku and Momo. All Might would yell over the intercom that they can now head back to where the rest of their class was, as a couple of their other classmates would then head off towards another building to do their own trial. As Izuku and Momo would get back there, many of the students would look at them with stars in their eyes, saying how they did amazing. Many of them even saying the same to Todoroki and Bakugo. While, of course, not being the winners, they still showed off some of their powerful abilities. As the rest of the classes would come and go with their battle trials, Izuku and the rest of them would head off towards the dorms. They had loved this new hero class, and they couldn't wait for the next one. And, of course, they would continue to eagerly train. Day by day and week after week, they would continue training their hearts out. Every single hero class put them closer and closer towards their dream. However, something else was awry. They had a field trip coming up, and they knew it. They were extremely excited for it as well. As they would walk into class this day of the USJ field trip, Aizawa would tell them all to put their uniforms on. They would put their uniforms on before going off towards the front of the building. There, waiting for them, was a bus. This bus, of course, going towards the USJ. They would pile on before the doors would slowly begin shutting, as Aizawa would tell the bus driver that he can begin driving away. As the bus driver would drive away, Izuku and his classmates would begin chatting up about what they think is going to happen. What do you think's going to be about with the USJ? They say to each other, many of them confused and unsure, just shrugging their shoulders. However, upon arriving, the Hero 13 would meet them before eagerly opening up the USJ to all of them, opening up wide the main doors as all of the students would walk in, their eyes glowing, looking around in amazement at the giant USJ building. However, all of a sudden, their excitement would be cut short, many of them looking on in horror as the portal would begin ripping through the air right near the center stage of the USJ. This purple portal would slowly begin expanding like a black hole, expanding over and over again until countless amounts of villains would begin funneling out of the portal. They would look on, staring at it, before some would ask Aizawa if this was a test, if this was real, as he would shake his head. This is real. These are real villains. They would look confused, wondering, what? Real villains? No, this can't be, right? Izuku would stare on, knowing that this probably wouldn't be good. His classmates, all of them, this could be dangerous. However, as he stands there, all of a sudden, a familiar green-haired woman appears, walking out of the portal. However, something is different. No longer is she short and recognizable. She is mutilated. She's tall, pumped, full of muscles like she had taken billions of rounds of steroids. Her muscles flexing and twitching, looking towards, scanning the crowd, as even her face was unrecognizable. Izuku would look towards his mother as Aizawa would stare towards Izuku. No way. This can't be good, he would say to himself as Izuku would fall to his knees, tears pouring out of his eyes, staring towards his mother. No. No. This can't be. This can't be. He would say, shaking his head in agony, in sorrow. His heart ached. He couldn't believe it. His mother would stand there lifeless, her eyes twitching around, looking at all of the UA students. She had become a Nomu. Shigaraki would stand next to her, laughing, patting her on the back. You see your son here? It's like a little family reunion, he would say in his scratchy voice before scratching his neck vigorously at the dry skin. Many of Izuku's classmates would stare, looking towards them, wondering what was going on. Why was Izuku acting this way? before Aizawa would tell them. This was Izuku's mother. She had been kidnapped, and now many of them stared on in horror. They couldn't believe it. As Izuku would stand there looking on, Aizawa would jump down along with 13 to begin fighting the giant onslaught of heroes. Of course, on top of this, Kirigiri would then create a portal underneath all of the UA students, scattering them across the USJ. However, Izuku would be exempt from this along with a couple of his other classmates. With Izuku on his knees, Kirigiri saw no need to send him out, knowing that he was probably subdued, wanting him to look on towards his mother, although it wasn't his mother anymore. Izuku staring on towards this, we see Momo walk up behind him, hugging his shoulders, as she would tell him, it's okay, it's okay, Izuku. Whatever that thing is, it's not your mother anymore. Maybe it was, but look at it. Look at it, Izuku, it's not. You have to understand. Izuku, with tears filling his eyes, would nod his head. I understand. His voice still shaky, as Momo would pat him on the back. It's okay. It's okay to be sad, she would say, with Izuku standing up. They're not gonna get away with this. Almost instantly, a flipping switch would go off in Izuku's brain, in his heart. He wasn't letting them get away with this. No, they would not. Izuku is now unhappy, filled with rage, anger building up within him. He would stand at the top of the stairs, yelling for 13 and Aizawa to get out of the way. His light blaring off of him, flowing off of him like flames. Izuku's light burning brighter than ever, blinding many that are in a close vicinity to him. He would stare on in hatred and malice towards all of the villains standing before him, as he would then open up a giant circle of light above them all. His seething voice would cut through the air, yelling out, raising his hand in the air, yelling out the words divine intervention, a new move that he had just created. And almost instantly, light would begin shooting out of this giant circle, shooting out, aiming at each one of the villains, landing direct contact with them. This light would pierce through their head, through their brain, as all of a sudden they would fall to the ground, either dead or unconscious. The lights would continue raining down, this divine intervention cutting through the waves of villains with ease, leaving all of them down towards the ground. Izuku would then jump down, staring on in hatred towards Shigaraki, shaking his head. "You're not gonna get away with this," Izuku would say as Shigaraki would laugh. "Oh, but you let my master get away with kidnapping her. And you didn't even bother looking for her," he would say, sneering towards Izuku, making him shake with rage. He couldn't take it anymore. His light would begin shifting into that of dark energy, the energy splitting through, becoming chaotic, glitching itself. His quirk was glitching. It wasn't working the way it had in so long. Because Izuku's brain, his thoughts weren't on the same page. He was filled with rage, but also sorrow. It led to his quirk almost malfunctioning. He'd reach out towards Shigaraki, sending wave after wave of a mix of these light and dark orbs, hitting Shigaraki. However, as they would hit things behind him, they would begin dissolving everything. Izuku would send a flurry of them barreling towards him, hitting the fountain, as they would begin expanding, wrapping this confused energy around the fountain before it would begin dissolving like it was acid. Shigaraki would look towards it in horror, wondering what was going on, before yelling for Inko, the Nomu, to go after Izuku. And he wouldn't call it Nomu this time, no, he would call it by its name, Inko, trying to get into Izuku's head, trying to basically make sure Izuku can't fight it. Who would want to fight their mother, after all? As Izuku would stand there in horror, seeing the Nomu fly towards him, a punch would be landed right into Izuku's stomach. Such hard and fast velocity, blood would be coughed out of Izuku's mouth instantly onto the Nomu's chest. Izuku would be sent flying back into the stairs he had once jumped down on. As he would get up, blood soaking his purple and yellow hair. He would look up towards the Nomu, looking on in horror. He can't fight his mother. He just can't. As the Nomu would reach out, extending its arm, grabbing Izuku with its telekinesis, jumping, lifting Izuku up, slamming him back down into the ground. Inko couldn't control herself as she would begin shaking Izuku with the telekinesis, slamming him into all of the different objects around. Momo, staring on in horror from the top of the steps, would yell for Izuku. Izuku, you have to kill it. You can't, it's not your mother anymore, she would say, tears streaming down her face. It pained her to see one of her best friends being thrown around like a rag doll like this. She couldn't take it anymore. Izuku would standing up in shock and in pain. You're right. Again, he would say, finally realizing it. He couldn't go on dealing with it like this. It was either kill or be killed. He would stand up, reaching out towards his mother, a spear appearing in his hand, the same light spear he had used to take down Bakugo. In his other, a dark shield would begin forming. Inko would rush towards Izuku, sending a fist right in as Izuku would dodge. The shield darkness, the energy would begin flowing off of it, grabbing hold of Inko's hand, burning, singeing into Inko's hand. The Nomu would begin screaming out in pain, with Izuku shaking his head. No, don't do that. Make this easy on me, please, he would say, as the Nomu would begin shaking once more, sending down both its fists right towards Izuku's head, with Izuku barely managing to duck beneath it. With Izuku now ducked, he would grab hold of his spear, spearing it right through the Nomu's chest. Another yelp out in pain would ensue, with the Nomu jumping back towards Shigaraki. It's okay, Inko. Take all the time you need to regenerate. As long as you can capture Izuku, that's all that matters, Shigaraki would say, Izuku looking towards him, fueled by his rage once again, his power surging, beginning to intertwine with each other. Izuku would reach out towards the Nomu, using his darkness prison, his hands spewing up from the ground, grabbing hold of Inko's legs. She tries to get them off, get away from the hands, but their grip is too much. Izuku, with tears in his eyes, would walk towards Inko, seeing a single tear fall from Inko the Nomu's face. Izuku would stare towards her, knowing that she's in there somewhere. Mom, he would say, at a safe distance away from her, I know you're in there. Which is why I have to do this. I can't take having you be in pain anymore, he would say, his voice starting to shake and to glitch almost. He was beginning to cry once again. I can't have you be in this much pain and to have to listen to these monsters and do things I know you would never do. So I'm sorry, Mom, but you understand. I have to do this, he would say, the arms clenching Inko even tighter now as he would grab his divine spear with both hands, spearing it right through the Nomu's heart. With one final screech, Izuku's hands would let go of her as she would fall to her knees, slumping to the floor, her head by Izuku's feet. He would go down, putting the hair out of her face, before looking up towards Shigaraki. A new-found rage would begin seething through him. Now that his mother was taken care of, he could finally look on towards one of the people he knew had done it to her. He would extend his hand, reaching up, slamming his arm into a fist, as the dark hands would reach up, grabbing Shigaraki, pulling him down to his knees. Izuku would walk up to him, punching him with just his bare hands. As he would continue doing this, slamming punch after punch, fist after fist, right into Shigaraki's head. Eventually, Shigaraki's nose would break, sending blood streaming down his face. How dare you? How dare you do something to such a kind-hearted woman? You're gonna rot in hell, he would say, reaching down, grabbing a forming spear in his hand. He would lift it up towards the air, about to plunge it right into Shigaraki's heart. However, before he could do so, Kirogiri would create a portal underneath him, as Izuku would jump back, about to fall into it, barely managing to dodge. Kirogiri, making this portal at the perfect time, would barely manage to allow Shigaraki to escape. Izuku would look on towards where Shigaraki had once stood, filled with anger and enrage. He had let them escape. He had let the person that had killed his mother escape. Before his own mind, he wasn't the one who killed Inko. It was them. They had twisted her into such a dark creature, and he couldn't stand that. He was going to get revenge, no matter the cost, no matter what. With them gone, Izuku would look around, looking at all of his classmates there after they had managed to defeat the villains as well. Police would begin surrounding the USJ, breaking in, with many ambulances arriving as well, taking care of the wounds of many around them. Recovery Girl would arrive shortly after, kissing many of the UA students that had been injured, as Izuku would basically be sat there with a tinfoil blanket around him, with Momo sitting there next to him, hugging him, Izuku's head on her shoulder. I can't believe that my own mother turned into a monster. She would begin flowing her fingers through his hair, trying to calm him down. It's okay, Izuku. It's okay. We will find them. We will. UA, and especially Class 1A, won't let them get away with this. You have my word on that, Izuku. Izuku would smile, smirking towards her, before opening up his arms, bringing Momo in for a full hug, a couple of tears falling down onto her back. We cut forward to see Izuku sitting in Nezu's office, Nezu twiddling his fists and his fingers in his arms and in his lap. He would sigh. I don't know what to say, Izuku, he would say, his solemn voice echoing throughout his tiny principal's office. What you experienced, no man should ever have to experience, let alone a child. I can't imagine what you're going through, and I just hope that you can get better. We have counseling services here for you, Izuku, if you ever need them. Izuku would stand up, pushing the chair out from behind him, before nodding his head. It's okay, Nezu. Truly, I'm fine, he would say, opening up the door before walking out of the room. With that, Izuku would walk into the dormitories where all of his classmates would then begin waiting for him. They'd ask him what had happened, with Izuku just shrugging his shoulders, that he was just talking to Nezu about the thing with his mom. They would nod understandably before letting Izuku go back towards his room. Weeks would end up passing before it would finally be time for the UA festival. Many of the students sat there eagerly waiting for this day to come, many of them training to their full potential. This was going to be amazing. They couldn't wait. The UA Sports Festival was a giant event, year after year, and this year was going to be no different. As Izuku would walk out, he would crack his fingers, walking into the classroom. He would sit down with the rest of his classmates as they would all be anxiously jittering their legs up and down. Aizawa would walk into the room before asking them if they were all ready for the festival. Many of them would pump their hands into the air, strongly saying that they are and that they can't wait, as Aizawa would shake his head in amusement. Alright, he would say. Well, let's go off. And 1A, give 'em hell, he would say, encouraging them as they would all yell out, right! They would say in amusement and in eagerness. They would race off towards the Coliseum, many of them excited, going in towards the locker rooms once arriving. They would all get dressed before meeting up in the tunnel. This was their big entrance, their grand display. They would begin walking out as their walkout music would blare over the loudspeakers. Many of the fans would stand up, pumping their fists into the air, cheering in excitement and amusement. This was amazing. The new crowd of heroes was standing before them, and they couldn't believe it. As they would all walk out, the crowd would stare on in amazement, yelling out, chanting 1A, chanting their names. As they would reach the center stage in the grass-filled Coliseum, many of the other classes would walk out, but not to the same level that 1A had had. And, of course, this left 1A with a target on their back. Midnight would walk out onto the field with a microphone in her hand, yelling for the crowd to silence. "Who's ready for the UA Sports Festival?" she would say, her voice blaring over the intercom. The crowd would cheer once more before dying back down. "We'll have 3 events this year: an obstacle race, a cavalry battle, and finally, the event you've all been waiting for, the 1v1 tournament," they would say, with the crowd once again cheering in excitement. With that, Midnight would say that it is time for the obstacle race before they would all funnel the rest of the UA students into a small, cramped hallway. Giant doors would be seen at the end of this hallway before they would begin creaking open, as the countdown would begin. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The doors would fully open as the UA students would race off, sending explosions flying back with Bakugo, ice sheeting across the way with Todoroki gliding upon it, with Izuku left behind, racing off towards them as Izuku was left basically behind, trying to catch up with many of the other first years slowly in tail. They would reach the first obstacle, the gorge, which Izuku would easily manage to get over. He had done it once before, sending a quick, powerful burst of light behind him, using it as a big jump boost, jumping over the ravine. The next event, the landmine, the minefield, Izuku would send a divine intervention into the air, sending out all of these lights down, spewing towards it, allowing for the minefield to get cleared. Izuku easily would safely cross before finally reaching the last obstacle, the giant robots. The robots standing in Izuku's way, he would stare up towards them, smiling. "This is going to be fun," he would say, jumping into the air, a spear of light in one hand and a spear of darkness in the other. He would send them flying, cascading down onto the robots as it would land a direct hit. All of a sudden, the spears would begin shaking before exploding into each respective energy, consuming the robot with ease, causing the robot to fall down destroyed. With that, Izuku would easily manage to run past the rest of the robots and would cross the finish line in a humble 3rd place. Bakugo and Todoroki had just barely managed to defeat Izuku in this event. As Izuku would stand there, he would look around, waiting for the rest of his classmates to pass, and slowly but surely, they would. Izuku and Todoroki would watch on eagerly as they would see Momo finish in top 10, many of their other friends finishing as well. With that, they would then be tasked with basically finding a team for the cavalry battle. And lo and behold, Izuku, Todoroki, and Momo, being the friends that they have been, would all choose to be together. 3 members of the top 10 all deciding to be on the same team. Quite overpowered. At least that's what many of classes 1B and 1C would think. As the cavalry battle would begin, Bakugo would see everyone lurch towards him, looking on, racing towards him. He had that 10 million point headband, and they all wanted it. Izuku's group, however, would have a plan. They would wait a solid portion of the time limit before finally racing after Bakugo, knowing that if they can get it in the final seconds, it would be worthwhile. As Izuku and his group would see all of this unfolding, he would see all of these students racing after Bakugo, jumping towards him, with his group just focusing on protecting their own points. Right now, with the second, third place headbands, and even Momo's, they had easily enough points to go on and make it towards the 1v1 event. However, they wanted more. They had their eye on the prize, and so they would look out towards Bakugo. He would send explosions flying down towards anyone that came towards his way. However, Izuku had an idea. As he lay on top of Todoroki and Momo, holding him up, he would send out hands, reaching from the ground, grabbing hold of Bakugo's feet. His teammates, not realizing this, would continue moving, leaving Bakugo in the dust. He would fall to the ground, basically helpless, as he would begin trying to send explosions towards the other people, but he couldn't move since he wasn't on top of his cavalry. And because of this, Izuku would fly in with his group, Todoroki freezing the rest of Bakugo's body, with Izuku ripping off that 10 million point headband from Bakugo's head. Seeing this, Bakugo would reach out in anger, reaching towards them, trying to grab his 10 million point headband back, but it was no use. Izuku's team had managed to get it, and they had managed to win. With the horn sounding, Izuku's team held a large majority of the points, even excluding the 10 million point headband. With that, we see Izuku's group walk off towards the locker rooms. They eagerly awaited to find out what was going to be their first 1v1 and who they were going to be against. As Izuku would stand there eagerly awaiting, he would find out that his first battle and his first opponent, lo and behold, was against Bakugo. He would smile towards himself, knowing that this was about to be fun. Bakugo, his first opponent? Oh, he's about to give everyone in the audience a show, he thinks to himself. The 2 young students walk up onto the arena, with Izuku looking off towards Bakugo, a smirk on his face. Bakugo still seething with anger after the stunt Izuku's team had pulled. He would pace back and forth, his eyes not leaving Izuku's. "You're gonna pay for that stunt you pulled, Izuku. You're not gonna be able to win this. All that effort for nothing." Izuku would smile once more as Midnight would yell "Go" over the loudspeaker. Bakugo, sending explosions flying back behind him, would race towards Izuku. However, Izuku would send out shadows across the arena, causing Bakugo to stop in his tracks. Izuku was nowhere to be found, and for that matter, nowhere to be seen. Bakugo couldn't see his own fingers inches in front of his face. That's how dark Izuku had made the arena. The crowd looked on confused. It looked like almost a box of darkness had erupted across the arena. As they would stare on, looking towards them, wondering what was going on, Izuku would peer out, reaching his hand towards Bakugo, grabbing his neck, pulling him towards him. Bakugo would go, reaching back, sending an explosion back behind him where Izuku had been. However, it was no use. Izuku easily dodging this before appearing above him, erasing all of the darkness before. This would basically confuse Bakugo. He would look around in a dazed sort of effort to try and find Izuku. However, it wouldn't work. Izuku, standing above Bakugo, standing before him, would look down towards him. Izuku raising his hand into the air, yelling out divine intervention, that yellow circle of light appearing, raining down light orb after light orb, hitting Bakugo with ease. He would try to dodge, but the light would almost home in on him, hitting him every single blow, leaving him too weak to stand. He would fall down to one knee, his body battered and bruised, breathing heavily. I don't know what the heck that was, Deku, but you're not gonna be able... He would stop in his tracks, his eyes rolling to the back of his head, knocked unconscious. Izuku now standing behind him, a dagger right into his chest. Izuku had sent a dark dagger flying towards Bakugo's stomach, plunging it into him, causing enough damage to finally knock out the young hothead. With that, Izuku's next opponent would then be Shoto Todoroki. Izuku and Todoroki would smile in the locker room before doing their friendly handshake towards each other, saying that the two of them got this, before they would walk off towards the arena. The two of them entering with different entrances would walk up, the crowd cheering, seeing a friendly rivalry. The two of them had been on the same team for the cavalry battle, and now they were going to be facing off against each other. This was pure cinema, many of them thought to themselves. Izuku, looking towards Todoroki, would smile as Midnight would yell, "Go!" Todoroki instantly would send an iceberg right towards Izuku, exploding with power. Fire would then erupt through the ice. It was only a distraction. The ice would melt with ease as the fire would reach towards Izuku. Barely, Izuku would create a shield out of his darkness, blocking the heat, similar to how Momo had done in the battle trial. With Izuku standing there, the heat burning, seeping around him, causing him to sweat, he would begin to deep breathe, breathing heavier and heavier. He would breathe out, exhaling. I gotta think of something. And fast, he would say to himself, before looking towards Todoroki. Jumping towards him, dodging out of the way of the fire, he would send a small orb of light towards him. Todoroki would laugh to himself, wondering what Izuku had meant by this thing, this orb of light coming towards him. He couldn't possibly have thought that this orb was going to stop him, right? Todoroki would easily dodge this orb before Izuku's fist would begin forming. He would clench his fist tighter as the orb would instantly 10 times in size, rotating back around. Todoroki, not seeing this, seeing the orb turn itself, curving around, lunging towards him. As Todoroki would go in, going towards Izuku, who's on the ground, sending an iceberg towards him, but his ice would suddenly stop halfway between himself and Izuku. The giant ball of light would burn itself into Todoroki's back, blinding him as he would fall down to the ground. This stunt that Izuku pulled had worked. Izuku would stand up smiling, dark hands appearing from the ground, grabbing Todoroki's arms, pulling him, creating this sort of wedge between him, pulling him down towards the ground, holding him there. Izuku would walk up towards him, smiling. It was a nice effort, Todoroki, but you're still 2 steps behind. He would say his spear of light held over his hand would be plunged down into Todoroki, not piercing his skin, but the energy would go deep into him, knocking him out cold. The crowd would erupt in cheers. The semi-final had been everything they had hoped it would be, cheering Izuku's name as he would walk back into the room. As Izuku would stand there looking towards the TV, he would see Momo winning her bout versus Tetsu. And finally, Tetsu would begin falling back towards the grass, trying to catch himself onto the arena, but would fall, meaning Momo Yaoyorozu was going on towards the finals. Izuku would smile towards himself, but would almost be a little scared. Momo was one of his best friends, and now he had to face her off against the 1v1 tournament. And of course, there was a little something else mixed into that fear. Izuku had a small crush on her. He didn't want to hurt his crush. I mean, after all she has done for him, she's helped him deal with his mother and get over it, allowing him to not die at the hands of her. As Izuku and Momo would walk up onto the stage, they would both wish each other a good battle as Izuku would smile towards her. She would begin laughing at him before yelling for him not to go easy on her as she wants the full experience, wanting to see what Izuku really has. Izuku would smile towards himself, shaking his head. "All right, but you asked for it," he would say, his voice booming across the arena. Momo would laugh towards him before jumping at him. She would create almost a net, trying to grab Izuku, wrapping around it, trying to catch him like a fish. However, it wouldn't work. Izuku would dodge each one of her attempts before racing towards her, reaching up towards the sky, grabbing a light spear, sending it flying down towards her. However, she would barely be able to dodge. Izuku would call back his spear like it was Thor's hammer, grabbing it in his hand, smiling. "Well, it seems you're doing a lot better than I thought you would, Momo," he would say, as she would laugh. "Don't kid yourself, Izuku. All I need is one small upper hand, and I've got this battle in the bag." Izuku would laugh to himself once again. The two of them would then begin in sort of a back and forth battle. They were having fun, and a lot of it at that. As Izuku would rain down divine intervention after divine intervention, the light coming towards Momo, she would block it with a giant shield she had managed to create. However, with her holding it, expressed the shadow of the shield blinding her from any other attacks, Izuku would appear before her, grabbing the edge of the shield, tilting it up, punching her in the head, sending her flying back a couple of meters. With Yaoyorozu now sort of dazed, her vision blurry from just getting punched in the head, she would look up once more to see Izuku's hand flowing with dark energy. He would punch her right in the head once more as this dark energy would slowly begin encapsulating her face. She would try to peel it off, but it wouldn't work, as it would begin sending pulses of energy into her head before she would begin falling to the ground, knocked out. The crowd would once more stand up, erupting in cheers, chanting Izuku's name. He had done it once again. He had managed to win another battle. We cut forward a measly 5 minutes as we see Izuku standing atop the podium, his smile brightening the entire stadium, Yaoyorozu in second place and Todoroki in third. With that, we see Izuku, Todoroki, and Momo walk back to the locker rooms, getting changed back into their UA uniforms. With Izuku walking out of the locker rooms, he would end up seeing Momo in the distance. He would run up to her, catching up to her as he would ask her if he could ask her a question. "Well, I mean, that's already a question, Izuku, isn't it?" she would say, laughing to herself, with Izuku sort of subtly laughing, rubbing his back. "Yeah, I guess it is. Look, I was just wondering, he would say, sort of unsure. "It's okay, Suku, just spit it out," she would say, her heart fluttering, unsure if what she had thought was about to happen was actually going to. "Look, would you, want to maybe go on a date sometime?" Yaoyorozu would smile towards him. "Sure, I'd love that," she would say, smiling before kissing him on the cheek and walking off. Izuku would turn his back as Momo would begin walking away. He would pump his fist in the air. "Yes! Yes, I knew it!" Izuku would say, almost like shocked and proud of himself. He had managed to ask Yaoyorozu out, and not only that, she had said yes. With that, we see Izuku go back to his dorm room, where, sitting in his mailbox, we would see hundreds of internship letters spewing out of it. However, of course, with Izuku's childhood and history, he would choose the wild kitty cats, wanting to continue training with them. However, there was something he wanted to do first. He wanted to find Shigaraki. He wanted to go and capture him. He wanted to get revenge. So, halfway through his internship with the Wild Kitty Cats, he would ask if they could go into the city. Most of their training, of course, being off-site and forest locations, meaning Izuku doesn't have much experience with cities. So he would ask them, asking if he could go out into it. They would nod their heads, saying, "Yeah, sure, I don't see why not." They would say, bringing Izuku into Hosu City, of all cities. Here, however, Izuku would end up getting separated from the group. He would look around, peering from rooftop, looking on, trying to find Shigaraki. He wanted to find him badly, after he had so closely almost captured him, and now Shigaraki was on the loose. He couldn't take it anymore. And eventually, his efforts would pay off. After a couple of days of searching, he would see the unforgettable light blue hair under the hood of a masked individual. He would follow this individual, following him, jumping from rooftop to rooftop, his eyes very, very fast, darting from place to place, making sure no one else was watching him, before he would see Shigaraki walk into a building. The door opening, a bell chiming, he would walk in and sit down at a bar. "This has to be it. That has to be their hideout," Izuku would say under his breath, readying his cork. He would jump in, sending a giant ball of light right into the side of the building, breaking a giant hole into it. The villains would look on, confused, staring towards Izuku. However, Shigaraki and Kurogiri would recognize him. "What?" Shigaraki would say, scratching his neck in anxiousness. "How did you find us? How did you find us?" he would say, sneering towards him, reaching out his hand, trying to grab a hold of him, trying to basically subdue him, decay him. However, Izuku wasn't having it. His anger seething through, breaking a hold of everything, his rage fueling his cork, his darkness taking over, hands erupting out of the ground, would grab every single villain in that villain base. Magni, Spinner, Shigaraki, all of them would be grabbed, forced down to the ground, unable to move, their legs and arms held. "Finally," Izuku would say, "finally, I get my revenge." Looking towards Shigaraki, however, an arm would extend out of a goopy gray portal. All for one. He would punch Izuku, sending him flying backwards, landing into a building. All for one would then appear, spewing out Nomu after Nomu from his gray portal. He knew he couldn't deal with a final battle just yet, but he could very easily distract Izuku and possibly manage to defeat a couple of powerful pro heroes along the way. So he would continue to cause his army of Nomus to expel out of his goopy gray portal. However, Izuku wasn't having it. As soon as All for One disappeared back, he would reignite his black hands, his dark hands reaching out from the ground, and this time Izuku wasn't going to let his opportunity go to waste. Shigaraki, fighting at his restraints, fighting at the hands, would try to break free, but Izuku wasn't having it. He would jump in, a ball of light in his hand, staring on right into Shigaraki's eyes. "Burn in hell," he would say, his voice and words filled with malice, slamming that orb of light right into Shigaraki's chest as he would begin screaming out in pain, yelling out like his entire body was burning from the inside. As he would begin slumping to the floor, his insides completely mutilated from the light. With Shigaraki no longer alive, Izuku would jump back, grabbing all of the villains, tying them up with his dark energy, pulling them out of the League of Villains hideout. Kurogiri, of course, being sort of a portal thing, was barely able to escape. However, Magni, Spinner, all of them were captured in the process. As Izuku would capture them, Best Jeanist would appear with Bakugo. Seeing Izuku having all of these villains captured, he would ask Izuku where his, basically, heroes watching him are. He would say that they had gotten separated and he had found the League of Villains hideout. Best Jeanist would take his word for it before he would begin getting punched by a giant Nomu. The onslaught would begin. Izuku no longer had time to worry about this. The Nomus would continually go and punch everything and everyone around him. This army would begin their onslaught. The Hosu incident would begin. As Izuku would jump back, jumping from the rooftops, knowing that he has to find his kitty cat group, and eventually he does, finding them struggling against a group of 3 Nomus. Izuku jumps down, sending an orb of light into the ground, causing a shockwave to send the 3 flying back. The kitty cat group would stare on, asking Izuku where he's been, but he would just shake his head. "Don't worry about it. I just got lost," he would say. The Nomus would begin screeching out, jumping, lurching towards Izuku. However, he would barely be able to dodge, sending out a divine intervention, cutting the Nomus down. With that, pro hero after pro hero, Endeavor, All Might, all of them would arrive, barely managing to defeat each and every Nomu. This attack was unlike any other. The scale and proportion that it had been of, it was scary. If it were to happen again, then the entire country of Japan could be at risk. They had to find All for One, and they had to do it fast. However, without All for One successor Shigaraki in the mix, they had some time, but of course the heroes didn't know that. Izuku was the only one, along with the League of Villains, who knew that he had killed Shigaraki. With Izuku fighting the Nomus and the kitty cats, and them ending up defeating them, we cut forward a couple of days to see Ida in the hospital. Izuku wasn't there to save him from the hero killer stain, but Todoroki was, barely managing to find Ida clinging to life right as the hero killer was about to slash him down. With this, Izuku would go towards Ida and say that he's sorry he couldn't be there and wouldn't be able to save him, but Ida would just shake his head. "It's okay, Izuku. Todoroki was there anyway. We're all classmates after all, and we're still learning." Izuku would pat Ida on the back, nodding his head. With that, we cut forward a couple of weeks to see it is finally time for the final exams. Izuku would be placed, of course, with Momo. The two of them in the weeks prior had gone on a couple of dates and had begun dating. The two of them, the first of the Class 1A group to start dating each other. And with that, unbeknownst to the teachers, they would be placed together once more, with Izuku and Momo headed off against Aizawa, or Eraserhead. The two of them would begin planning, knowing that Aizawa could only cancel one quirk at a time, and because of this, they had to use that towards their advantage. The horn would sound as they would race into the city, looking from building top to building top, looking for where Aizawa could be. However, they couldn't find him, unsure of any possible areas that he was hiding at. As they were looking, eventually they would see a scarf erupt towards him, grabbing hold of Momo's leg after Izuku had barely managed to dodge. However, as Izuku would go in, going with his light to try and cut through Aizawa's scarf, his quirk would be erased. He would capture Momo before jumping off once again. Izuku now left towards himself, jumping towards Aizawa. He would begin trying to look for him as Aizawa would continue to get farther and farther away. Aizawa having the experience that of the building tops, the experience to be able to jump from building top to building top, having done this for years. Izuku would eventually manage to catch up with him as he would send a ball of light towards him, ducking down below a building so he couldn't erase his quirk. This light would follow him over and over again until it would finally make contact, sending him flying into the side of a building. This would cause Momo to be able to get free of her grasp, jumping towards Izuku, asking if he's alright, which of course he would nod his head. Yup, I am, he would say, with Momo smiling. Alright, I think our game plan should be you use your quirk and I'll run in towards him, forcing him to erase mine, and then possibly you hiding. Maybe a divine intervention or two could prove to be successful against him. Izuku would nod his head, saying right, as the two of them would look towards each other, looking on, wondering where Aizawa could be. They would jump down, looking from place to place, looking for where Aizawa was, until finally they would end up finding him. He was in an alleyway, catching his breath, trying to mend his injuries, as Yaoyorozu would stand at the edge of it, blocking him in. Izuku, raising his hand into the air, would yell out divine intervention as light circle would appear in the sky, raining down orbs of light towards Aizawa. Aizawa, forced to erase Momo's quirk, wouldn't be able to stop the divine intervention, as light orb after light orb would rain down into him, hitting him over and over again. With that, Aizawa would be taken out, and Momo and Izuku would wrap their tape around him, successfully capturing him and proving once and for all that they had passed the final exam and that they were very capable of being heroes. With that, the rest of their classmates would slowly begin finishing each and every single one of their final exams. And with this, Nezu would begin announcing to them that they had 1 week before they would begin heading off towards a forest training camp. And in this week, they could do anything. They could relax, they could celebrate, they could train, as long as they were prepared. With this week of time away from classes and training, Izuku and Momo would take this opportunity. They would begin going out on more dates and hanging out with each other, eventually having their first kiss. This, of course, would lead them to grow closer and closer towards each other, and eventually that week would pass and the two of them would head off towards the forest training camp together, sitting next to each other on the bus. However, of course, the Wild Kitty Cats would stop this bus, sending all of the UA students cascading out of it, causing confusion before telling them that they have to find the the base camp, or else they wouldn't be eating dinner anytime soon. Izuku would smile towards himself as the kitty cats would say, "What's up, Izuku?" before rushing off. Many of them would be confused, wondering maybe he had internshipped with them. Izuku would shrug his shoulders before saying he's been training with them since he was very little, which would confuse some of them, but oh well, I guess they would think. With that, they would go through the forest, eventually finding their way towards the forest training camp. They would then begin training, each and every single one of them training their hearts out, training using their quirks in the best of their abilities. And this is where the kitty cats would finally force Izuku into a very uncomfortable position. He had to fully use both his light and dark quirks as best he possibly could, using them as long as he could to basically try and be able to get as much energy and output out of each of it as he possibly could. With Izuku learning how to do this, the rest of his classmates as well would practice until days would pass and night would fall. All for one, having had to create another Vanguard action squad, would create one. He would find Toga, Mr. Compress, and Dabi, even Muscular, to begin their attack. This was where he wanted to do it. All Might was miles away. He could finally take out the strongest of the strong of Class 1A, and he could do it himself, along with his 3 remaining members of the League of Villains. As Izuku's standing there practicing and training in the darkness, all of the sudden he would hear a cry out from Koda. He would rush off towards it, wondering maybe if Koda had gotten himself hurt or something, wondering why Koda wasn't with his aunt in the first place. Upon reaching there, he would see Muscular standing over Koda, the weakened young child crying out with tears, hiding his eyes with his hat, as the giant villain would laugh towards him. "Oh, come on, kid. You don't want to play with me? Come on, I know you want to," he would say, smiling, snarling towards him. However, Koda would shake his head, pleading with him to not do anything, not to hurt him. With that, Muscular would look off towards him, smiling, wondering, reaching back his fist, going to punch him. However, Izuku would throw his spear, stopping Muscular from doing so. Izuku, breathing heavy, exhausted from using his quirk for days on end, hour after hour, had barely managed to stop Muscular's punch. The spear would come flying back to Izuku as he would catch it, but he was still extremely exhausted. Muscular would then shift his focus towards the heavy-breathing Izuku and would smile. "Oh, if it isn't one of those 1A brats. Wait a minute. I recognize you. You're the one the boss wants me to kidnap. Oh, this is just great. I'll kidnap you and move up in the ranks. Maybe even become his right-hand man," he would say, jumping, lurching his body towards Izuku, with Izuku barely managing to dodge, blocking it with a shield of shadows. Muscular would smile towards Izuku, his muscle fibers forming around his muscles, pumping himself full, making himself seem extremely muscular. He would jump down, sending punch after punch flailing towards Izuku, with Izuku barely managing to dodge each and every blow. With Izuku barely managing to dodge, he would finally see an opening. He would reach out a giant hand of darkness, bigger than one he had ever created before, with these giant fingers wrapping around completely around Muscular's body, gripping hold of him, pulling him back, pulling him as far back as they could. Muscular, subdued, wouldn't be able to do anything as Izuku's shaky, tired arms would raise into the air. "Divine intervention," Izuku would barely manage to say, both his hands needed, using up as much energy as he could, sending out giant orbs of light, the biggest divine intervention he had ever managed to summon. These giant orbs of light cascading down towards Muscular, landing direct blows on him, knocking him out cold. Izuku would grab Koda, racing off towards the base camp where they would arrive, seeing the wild kitty cats in basically stress mode. They were looking around trying to find all of 1A students as they were under attack, and a big one at that. Blue flames erupting over the horizon, scattering across, burning the forest. Izuku would place Koda down as his aunt would hug him. Oh, Koda, please never go that far again. I don't know what could have happened if you were to get hurt, she would say, with Izuku looking around. However, all of a sudden, their ears would begin being pierced. A slow, clapping sound would be heard. It appears we finally meet again, Midoriya. I thought surely your mother would be the one to do you in, and even Shigaraki, but it appears I vastly overestimated their own strength while underestimating yours. Perhaps this battle, it may be my last. But, of course, we shall see. I'd like to think that you'll be a lot easier to take down without anything holding me back, he would say, jumping towards Izuku, all for one, and his mask, his ventilator breathing. With Izuku jumping back, he rolls his eyes. Are you serious? I can't believe this, he would think to himself. Over and over again, he has to deal with villain after villain, and he's exhausted. Why does it have to be him? Izuku would jump back, sending orb after orb of light barreling towards All For One. However, each one is dodged or exploded by All For One's quirk. It doesn't work. All For One jumping around, dodging each of Izuku's attacks and onslaughts before sending these staticky fingers reaching towards him. His arm bulging out of his suit, ripping at the seams. Izuku would shake his head, rolling his eyes, sighing. Oh, great, he would think to himself, creating spear after spear of light, sending it flying towards All For One. However, nothing would work. However, we would end up seeing Momo run through the tree line, yelling out Izuku right as he was about to get hit by one of All For One's blows. She would yell out, distracting both All For One and Izuku, the two of them looking towards her, her voice piercing the cold, silent air, as she would run towards Izuku, throwing him a shield that he would be able to use, blocking All For One's attack. However, this would cost her. All For One would smile, seeing her a weak spot. He would reach out, extending his fingers, sending a blow right into her chest, creating a hole right through it. Izuku would yell out, "No!" He would say, everyone he loves seems to be killed. He would rush towards Momo, grabbing hold of her as blood would spew out of her wound. "No, Momo, not like this, not like this," he would say, tears welling up in her eyes. "You can't go, you can't." She would choke on her own blood, spewing out of her mouth. She would caress his hair, pulling it out of his eyes, putting it behind his ear. "It's okay, Izuku. I'm not dying," she would say, her voice shaky and stuttering. "Just please take care of him. Don't let him hurt." She would say, coughing up on her own blood, spitting it out onto her chest. "Anyone else," she would finally say, finishing her sentence. Izuku, with tears in his eyes welling up along with rage, would nod his head. "Yes, Momo. Yes, I won't. I won't let anyone do this. I won't let him hurt anyone else," he would say, jumping towards All For One, smiling towards him as All For One would laugh. "So, that didn't get you into your little frenzy that Shigaraki managed to so praise. Izuku would shake his head no. This is where you end, All for One. Your time on this planet is up. His voice sure and confident, echoing across the hills as All for One would laugh. We'll see about that, he would say, jumping, leaping towards Izuku, his staticky hands racing towards him, jumping, trying each attack, trying to grab hold of Izuku and steal his quirk, managing to kill Izuku in the process. But Izuku doesn't let that stop him. He jumps from board to board. Nothing is going to get in his way. As he's doing this, he'd send divine intervention after divine intervention spewing down towards All for One, jumping towards him. However, All for One would be able to dodge it, dodging each and every single attack. Izuku knows he needs to stop him in his tracks if he wants to land a divine intervention. And so he would finally reach out his arms, stopping, consolidating his power, reaching towards his hands, clenching them into fists as giant hands of darkness would erupt out of the ground seemingly to be splitting open at the seams, light peering out of it. Izuku grabbing hold of All for One with his giant hands, yelling out a new attack. Hell's prison, he would say, the ground opening up, the hands reaching out, reaching towards All for One, pulling him down into it. He would yell out, yelling, no, this isn't how I die. However, Izuku at the same time would reach his hand up into the air, yelling one final time, divine intervention. All for One, seeing the light circle appear over him, seeing the orbs go down, giving him a heavenly judgment, sending him down into the ravine. The Hell's prison is working. The dark hands pulling him, gripping his legs even tighter as he tries and struggles to break free, pulling him down into the ground. The ravine would begin closing. He had just been sucked away into the ground, suffocated by the dirt around him, with All for One no longer alive. Izuku would race over to Momo, falling to his knees, pleading with her, closing up her chest, trying, feeling for a pulse. There's nothing there. He begins doing CPR, breathing into her mouth, doing the 30 bumps, trying everything he can to get her back to life. Over and over again, tears seeping out of his eyes, his fellow classmates watching as Izuku struggles with her lifeless body. Please, Momo, please, you can't go like this, you can't, he says, tears falling down, dripping onto her. As he continues, his classmates look away, tears falling down their own faces. The scene is it's saddening, they can't believe it, and they just hope with everything in their hearts Izuku is able to do it. All of a sudden, however, a cough splits through the air. It's Momo's. Her heart begins pumping once again, slowly, but a heartbeat is there. Izuku smiles, looking towards her, smiling, hugging her, plugging her chest tightly, wrapping his shirt around it. Oh, I knew you were dead, Momo, I knew it, he says, hugging her tightly. We cut forward a couple of weeks to see Momo still in a coma, Izuku at her bedside, playing a song on the radio, their favorite song together. As Izuku's playing it, we see Momo's eyes slowly flutter open. She looks towards Izuku, smiling at him, reaching out with a shaky, soft voice, knowing that he would wait for her. Izuku stands up, yelling for the doctors to come into the room. As they do, seeing her awakening from her coma, They smile, looking off towards Izuku, placing their hand on his shoulder, congratulating him that he had truly saved her life. Izuku would nod his head as we then cut forward years into the future. Momo and Izuku, Todoroki, Bakugo, all of Izuku's classmates continue to take their classes in UA, eventually graduating from UA and becoming heroes. Our half-light, half-dark protagonist, Izuku Midoriya, becomes the #1 hero, and eventually his wife, Momo Midoriya, would become a top 10 as well, eventually having kids together with extremely powerful creation, light and dark quirks, their quirks intertwining with each other, creating some of the most powerful quirk users this world has ever seen. And with that, I am going to end What If Deku had a half-light, half-dark quirk. I hope you all did enjoy this video. It really was fun to make, and I hope you did like the ending. I'm starting to tell more of a story with my what ifs, even doing some ships to continue sending off that story vibe to have better storytelling, and I hope you all do enjoy it. Please remember to comment your what if suggestions down the comment sections below. I will be replying to as many comments as I can, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really, really does help this channel out. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.